Hello and welcome to the FSF Podcast. This is the show that is made by nerds for nerds. And so we're glad that you found your way to our nerdery. I'm Tim, I'm your host, and I am very excited to welcome our guest today, who is an animation storyboard artist. He's been a comic book artist. He's been a producer of a bunch of animated classics and comic books over the years. You've seen his artwork and other things in Star Wars comics, Marvel comics, DC comics, as well as shows and video games such as Pryde of the X-Men, Ultimate Spider-Man, Halo 4, Avengers, Earth's Mightiest Heroes, and so much more. So I am very excited to welcome Rick Hoberg to the FSF Podcast. Welcome to the show.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing dandy. I'm glad that we're getting a chance to catch up. We had an opportunity to meet at back at September at the Monroe Comic Con in Monroe, Michigan, and you were kind enough to sit in on a panel for us, and we got to hear. For those of us who were here, we got to hear a little bit of your origin story and how you got started in the business and all the things that you've done. But for those who weren't able to attend the Monroe Comic Con, I was hoping that you could share a little bit of that again. Tell people how you got started, because I always say this: we're nerds. Nerds love a good origin story.
Yeah.
So, in the origin story of Rick Hoberg, what made you want to get involved in comics and art and all those things?
It was just after I was injected with the super soldier formula. No, I had read comic books my entire life and watched cartoons, and the ones I was most influenced by were, like, in the early days, that would have been the Tarzan comic books that Dell was producing, and Turok and
Okay.
Superman and those books. But then Marvel started up when I was just going into my teens. I might have been 10 or 11, something like that, when I first picked up Fantastic Four 16 and Spider-Man #3 at a bookstore in Bishop, California, while my folks were taking a trip. And I just went, wow, where have these been? Because there's so much more going on emotionally and character-wise in Marvel comics than there were at the time that DC was producing their stuff. It was kind of flat comparatively, not art-wise, but character-wise, they just weren't going anywhere with that stuff. So, and even though I still love DC Comics stuff, so that influenced me, as did Johnny Quest when it started. That was a big deal to me because I'd never seen what I would call a comic book put on TV, and that's what Doug was creating. He even phrased it like that when I met him years later, and he became my first director producer in the business when I got hired to work on Godzilla, Hanna-Barbera.
Okay.
So along the way, though, I met Russ Manning after I got involved with a comic book club out of Orange County, California, and I became the president of the club along with a couple other guys that were friends of mine. And we organized this art show at a local open air mall, which turned out really good. And I met Russ. He saw some of my work and he said, hey, you're pretty good. Were you interested in doing some assistant work or doing some stuff for me on Tarzan? And I went, well, yeah, of course, because I was a huge fan of Russ's.
Sure.
And I followed Tarzan, and I really just adored what he did with it, because really all those years they were doing Tarzan in the comics, no one ever referenced the Edgar Rice Burroughs Tarzan. That is La of Opar, Pellucidar, Paludan, all of these great places that they had access to, but just stayed away from for some reason. And Jane, too. Jane was not in much of that other stuff.
Sure.
It was mostly about Tarzan running around having adventures. So Russ was the guy who, all of his stuff was about that. He immediately, in his first main story, put them right in the midst of Opar with Law and the Beastmen and all of that stuff, and put Jane in danger of Law because Law hated her for the fact that she was Tarzan's woman and she wanted Tarzan. So anyway, I made a hit with Russ that way, and I got my first job from him, which was drawing Tarzan overseas comics with Bill Ray. Bill was my buddy at the time. And we went up there together to his place in Majeska Canyon outside of where we lived in Orange County, California. And he hired us immediately because we had proved to him at that point we could ape his stuff by swiping anything we could get our hands on. So we would reproduce Russ Manning looking Tarzan stories. And that was my beginnings.
Nice. All right. Well, that was a good intro for you, especially because it was something you enjoyed. So I'm sure it caught your attention pretty quickly, pretty easily.
Yeah.
Was able to keep you going. All right.
Well, it was also the one of the most frightening situations I've ever gotten myself in, because once I had the job, I went, "Oh my God, how am I ever going to get this done?" It was the first time I had to face doing an entire 16-page story or something like that, and I was going, I don't even know where to begin with this. So there was a lot of humming and hoeing every time Russ would call and say, "How's it going?" And I'd go, "Well, it's getting there." It was like, yeah, it was a real brutal situation for me, but it did get done and he liked it. So we got handed another one. And that didn't last too long, though, because there was something going on between him and Edgar Rice Burroughs, and they let him go as the editor of those books and brought Mark Evanier on, who was editing the Korak books at the time. So we were working for Mark Evanier, and that was actually a godsend, because Evanier has turned out to be one of my great collaborators over the years. Every time I've worked with him, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And he's always real open as a collaborator, and he doesn't worry about deadlines. He just expects you to make them. He doesn't dangle them over your head like Russ would do and threaten you with them like a sword of Damocles.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I can see how that.
Every editor is different that way. Yeah, every editor is different. Sure. My favorite was probably Julie Schwartz over at DC, because I was working for him for a short time, and Julie said, "Look, I don't care if you're going to be late. I just want to know about it well ahead of time." And I thought, wow, that's a great way to edit, because there are guys who will sit on something and never get it done. I wasn't one of those guys, but I came close to missing deadlines a few times. Not too much, though. I didn't like doing that.
No, but it seems like a pretty fair way to do it. I mean, at least she's just asking for communication. Sounded like just communicate with me, and
Well, Julie was a man. Julie Schwartz.
Oh,
Julie,
okay.
Julie Schwartz. I'm sorry. I was calling him by a common name he was known as in the office. He was he was the Superman editor for probably 15, 20 years, a long time.
Okay. All right. But yeah, still, either way, still, it's an issue of communication and, respecting the people you're working with. So I think that's a fair request.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So Rick, you started off there and you had your moments of, okay, I have the job. Now I got to keep the job. You worked your way into other universes over the time, such as we talked about DC and Marvel and Star Wars. All of those are massive IPs with super expansive universes. Is there, out of those universes though, is there one that you drew for that you worked in that you felt you had a stronger connection where it made it easier for you to do your work for that universe?
Yeah, one came right after the other. One was when I got over at Marvel through Roy. I was working and having a good time working on the stuff he wanted me to work on, and he gave me the well, he didn't give it to me. We were Don Bluth and I were kind of hooked up as partners by Roy, and it worked out great because we had the same kind of sensibilities. We were friends and had a lot of laughs together. And one night at a party I was throwing at my house, he told us, "Well, listen, I'm really busy, so I can't come up with all the ideas for whatever. You guys pick some stuff to me, and let's see if we can come, if we can do anything." So Don and I started throwing ideas around over a couple of Mai Tais, which was my wife's specialty at the time. And the pina coladas, I'm sorry. And I remember well because of Don. So anyway, we came up with the Thordis character, the female Thor character.
Okay.
And Roy bought it immediately and said, "Yeah, go ahead and write that up and do it." Well, that was a perfect story for me. After I'd been working at Marvel with Roy, having to research everything and trying to make sure I got stuff right, here I was handed something I knew inside out. That is Jack Kirby's Thor world, because I'd read all those comics. I loved Jack's work. So, and I had all the comics so I could swipe whatever I wanted to, and less swipe, but have all the reference I needed to get it right. So that was a perfect job for me. I really did what I consider my very first perfect job in comics. It really was a good one, and everything in it was good. Every page was good. I can't say that about some of the other stuff I did, like the Tarzan stuff, or a couple of the jobs on What If. So that really encouraged me a lot. And then after that, I got my break on at Hanna-Barbera, and that worked out real well too, because it was something that I'd never done any animation. But when they sat me down in the layout department and said, "Draw layouts for us," I went, "Oh, I understand this perfectly. What I'm doing here is I'm pulling apart the elements of each panel of a story, being it comics, storyboards, whatever, and I'm just breaking it down for the next guy to be able to animate it." And I understood it perfectly. When they set me down, they were kind of going, "Wow, you never took any animation classes?" I went, "No, I just watched a lot of cartoons." So it worked out good, and it was Godzilla. We were doing that very first thing they did back in the 70s. And it was fun. I had a great time on it. I was working with one of my best friends still, Will Mineo, who got hired the same day I did. And we were working for Doug Wildey. And Dave Stevens was on the crew, as were a whole bunch of other people, like some old Disney guys, one in particular, Mo Golub, who had done a lot of painted covers for Tarzan in the 50s. Wonderful wildlife painter. So it was a great crew, and I learned a lot from them. Every time I've gotten into a crew, I've learned things from them, probably more than they've learned from me, that's for sure. And that ended with the Halo tour, where literally I was a digital immigrant for years. I knew a little bit about what I needed to know with Photoshop, but when I got in over there were guys going, "Rick, don't you know how to do that?" And I went, "No," because I was being offered education, so I would let them show me. And by the time I left Halo, I was really good with my computer and Photoshop and anything I needed to know. So it's led me to doing most of my stuff digital these days, or at least starting it digital and then transferring it to paper if I need it.
Okay.
There's been people who, when I do a commission, will complain, "Well, you're not going to do this from blue lines, are you?" And I'm going, "That's pretty much the only way we work. But no, I will pencil it out for you, but it will be from something else I've already created, because it's just easier that way. And believe me, the mistakes are easier to take care of now."
Fair enough. Okay. So you talked about the things that you had stronger connections with. Was there any of those that you struggled to have a connection to the universe, the characters, where you still did the work, but it maybe, you weren't as ecstatic about it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, there was a couple of jobs after I lost the job on Batman, which was more due to the fact that I wasn't getting any communication from the writer and the editor. And Dick Giordano didn't want to lose me, so he just said, "Let's just play it by ear for a while, and I'll hand you jobs. You take them if you want them, and we'll find a niche for you somewhere along the line." And in the midst of that, I worked on a comic book that was quite good and really well done, but it just wasn't a fit for me. And that's Checkmate.
Okay.
Checkmate made sense to me, and I knew it was a superhero James Bond story, and that was pretty obvious. And Paul Kupperberg was doing a great job writing it. He always did, but it just didn't gel with me. And I was getting great inking too from Al Bay, so I should have enjoyed it more. I just didn't. But then that was a time when I was having kind of a crisis of whether I could really do this well. I'd hit that point where I'm going, I don't even like my own work, And then Green Arrow came along, and Green Arrow changed everything for me. That was really a high point for me. I suddenly had a chance to remake myself as a guy who could do other stuff, such as a realistic comic book, and I did it. And it was through the tutelage of Mike Grell, because I'd seen Mike Grell working, and I understood that, he works like Doug Wildey. I don't need to worry whether I'm using a photograph or something and tracing it and then redrawing it, or whether I'm doing it by hand. So I had the opportunity to do all this stuff that was realistic, and almost every character in it was based on some scrap that I had, and I would use it over and over again for that particular character, such as Eddie Fires. Eddie Fires was a lot of fun to do. He was the was he CIA, I think? And anyway, he was a bad guy who'd been kicked out of the CIA or something, and he was based on Archie Goodwin. So it was easy to do that because Archie had a particular look, and I was working from this book of photos that was put out. There was a whole sets of these books. I can't think of the names of them, but they would have like a set of books that was all men's faces, and they had a whole section with this guy who looked just like Archie Goodwin. So it was easy to do Eddie Fires, and I looked forward to it because it was such an easy thing to do at that point.
Okay. All right. Excellent. So one of the things I looked up when I was doing my research about you, there was something that was attached to your name that I was not aware that you had been involved in. And I was like, oh, okay. So I did a little more research on it. And I watched a few other interviews with you talking about this particular thing. And I thought, well, I know he's already answered this a bunch of times, but I'm going to ask him about it anyway, because it was just such a fun topic. And that was the Pryde of the X-Men with the Australian accented Wolverine. And I heard you say that I think in one of the interviews that it was basically Hoberg the Australian accent. So if I was hoping that you could tell me the story behind all of that.
Who would have said that? I mean, I made it pretty evident, as Will and Larry. This came down directly from Monroe Comic Con. Their editorial staff, whoever was in charge of working with us, that's the way we want it, because that's the way we plan on revealing that he was originally from Australia. And looking back on it after it was done, we went, oh, we got snookered here. Because they weren't on board with us doing this without their input. And we didn't always accept it because we had a vision in this. We wanted to do it as pure X-Men. We did not want somebody trying to sell toys off of it or anything like that, because it was just a pilot. There wasn't any point to it. And it wasn't going to really be shown but once or twice here and there. So we really wanted to do something that had the costumes right, that had the characters right. And my initial voice direction on it would have been Clint Eastwood. Somebody who talked like this, and that's what he is. Yeah, that's exactly who he should be. And maybe with a tinge of Canadian accent, but the way they've done it in the films is great, as they did what I would have done. Larry and Will basically cast the character in the animated series perfectly. I thought it was just exactly what he needed to be. But that whole thing was just it was one of those things where I couldn't really go against what they wanted to say, because Margaret Lush and the rest of the people at Marvel Films at the time didn't want to have any problems with Marvel over this, because this was the one group of main characters that they had never option. So they had a whole total control over it. And that was great for them. And that's why we started pushing them to use it in Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, because we knew how great the X-Men was. All of us had stuff. We had a great idea of what reaction societally these characters would have upon teenagers in particular, but also adults and smaller children. It worked for everybody.
Oh yeah, I mean,
that thing was just something that was a mistake, and it should never have happened. But it still doesn't hurt that show, because that's a really beloved half hour of film. I'm amazed how many people want to talk about that more than they want to talk about the entire X-Men series.
I for one loved it. I mean, so but I had forgotten about it. Growing up, it's one of those things that I remember watching it as a kid. I remember, then the X-Men, the animated series came, and in my mind, it's always just been Cal Dodd. Cal Dodd has always been.
Oh, and he's great. Yeah.
Yeah, he's fantastic as Wolverine. He's just wonderful. But, in my brain, it's always been Cal Dodd, always been Cal Dodd. And then I remember a few years back, somebody asked me, "Hey, did you ever see this?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, I've seen that." What do you think about the Australian? He doesn't have an Australian accent. Cal Dodd's not Australian.
So
And I was like,
you had totally whiffed on the fact that
yeah, I totally
he
just
was
whiffed on the fact that it was somebody else had voiced it, and there was a different actor and everything else. And just for whatever reason, in my brain, I had erased the fact that this other gentleman had voiced Wolverine for Kitty Pryde in the X-Men. So yeah, it's just
I'm not sure who owns that film. It probably is Disney at this point. But good
probably.
Lord, they're using Cal now regularly on the new series on 97. And
Yeah.
we should have him read those lines and just edit it in and be done with it and get rid of the other recording. Although the whole recording itself is pretty good because it's got really top-notch animated talent at the time. I even sought out John Richardson, who was the second voice of Professor Quest and Johnny Quest, to play Professor X, because I wanted that touchstone in there, and,
Yeah.
and he loved it. He was like, when we finished recording, he went, I want to tell you that that's the best and most serious animated adventure show I've done since I worked on Johnny Quest. And they went, really? Oh, that's great. Thank you so much, And that's what we wanted. We wanted it to be straight, serious stuff. And if they wanted a funny animal, they had Lockheed.
Right. Well, the great thing about that half hour with Kitty Pryde, Pride of the X-Men, is that if you watch it along with everything else, it fits right in. It holds up. It's other than the Australian voice will throw you a little bit if you're not familiar with it, or if you've, like me, if you've deleted that out of your brain, it throws you at first. But it's that notwithstanding, it's like you said, it's a very solid half hour of television, and it's a lot of fun to watch.
Well, we had free reign, and free reign to us meant let's do X-Men Marvel style. Let's make sure it's just like a comic book. But we needed to appease everybody. We needed to kind of do a bit of an origin story, and I'm pretty sure it was my idea to bring Kitty in as the point of view character, because Will and Larry knew I would always been big on doing these superhero things from the point of view of a child, because that always worked for me as a kid watching The Rifleman. The fact that we were seeing all this from the rifleman's son's point of view, and that will make a hero bigger than life to the audience. So it worked real well for that, and I thought, I'm pretty sure this is going to work here for us as well. And you've got a lot of movies that aren't exactly about this stuff where it works. Like what comes to mind is To Kill a Mockingbird. That's all done from Scout's point of view. So she sees Atticus as a bigger than life heroic character, her father.
No, I think you guys nailed it on that. So yeah, it was just one of those little stories that I came across, and I was like, I need to know I want to hear the entirety of the story behind it. It's a lot of fun for me because I'm a big fan of the X-Men. I loved reading the comics growing up. I loved the animated series. I can't tell you how excited I was and how loud I yelled when the announcement for X-Men 97 came out. I was just super duper excited about that. And
these guys have been really nice to all of us. When I met them just this last summer at San Diego Con, I had been invited down by Larry Houston. He says, yeah, you really got to come to the con. I didn't know that there was a reason behind it. He wanted me to meet these people because I never met even the cast. And I'm here for the first time. I met Cal and Allison, who plays Jubilee now, and Allison and Cal and my niece all hung out at the studio party together. So we just had a great time together. And then I met a lot of people there from Marvel Studios who knew who I was. And I'm going, how do you guys know who I am? I'm not big. And then, everybody's aware of who you and Will and Larry are, because you guys kind of set the pace for what everybody wanted a Marvel show to be like. And I went, wow, that's amazing. And through the evening, I met people who said, hey, Rick, how you doing? And I'm going, I never met this guy before, So it was pretty fascinating. And it led to meeting one of the 3 or 4 new directors on the show. And he said to me, after I introduced myself, and I said, man, you guys are just doing the greatest job on X-Men. He goes, were just standing on the shoulders of giants. And I went, oh my God, that's the best compliment I've ever had in my life. And it's highly unusual in the Hollywood type setting to have one professional say that to another when he's got the upper hand of that Disney money and that show he made. Because boy, that's a good show.
Yeah, well, I had to start somewhere, and you guys gave him a perfect foundation to jump from.
That's the way they feel about it. I understand also from having heard our head writer talk about it, Eric, that when they were hiring for the show, they told the head writers who were going to be, whoever was going to be the head writer and the artist that, just so you know, if you want to do something new with the X-Men here, you're on the wrong show. And you might as well just move along because we only want people who want to pay homage to the original and do it as well as they can do it. So I went, wow, that's just amazing. I never heard of that before.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it is. It's very cool.
Yeah, very. All right. So we here's a question I want to ask you because we have a Facebook group of about 215,000 members, almost 216,000.
Jeez.
And so and we share our podcast information there and episodes and all that stuff. So this will be posted inside of our group. But we also have a ton of memes, and a lot of those memes are mashups of this universe with that universe, whatever it may be. So we've asked this question of a few other people who are creatives, such as yourself. So here it goes. Rick, if you could choose two characters that you've drawn over the years or you've had, worked with in some form, that would have to team up in an effort to save the Earth from an incoming enemy, who would you choose and why?
Probably I'd have to do somebody who I created, Eternity Smith, and Superman. Because Superman can do anything physically that it needs to be done, and Eternity Smith would have the knowledge of various places and time that he's been to. So I think that would work well.
Okay. I'm not going to argue that.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do. You can say Batman because he's the greatest detective or something like that. There's all sorts of characters. Cable also would be a time traveler, but his is less, his is more specific, where Smith's was all over the place. He would travel to any place he needed to go.
Okay. No, I think that's a great combination. All right. Very good. All right. So Rick, we're at a point where we'd like to ask you what we call our silly question. Now you can answer this as silly or as serious as you like. And it's really not all that silly of a question, but we just call it a silly question. So Rick Hoberg, what's your favorite dinosaur?
Oh, that would have to be the T-Rex. I always loved the T-Rex. Yeah, I've been a fan of dinosaurs since I was like 3 or 4 years old. My dad sat me down to watch King Kong, first movie he ever sat me down to watch. And I just fell in love with it. It didn't frighten me. I was just fascinated with the dinosaurs. And then I was so fascinated with them, my mom knew a toy store that sold those little plastic molded dinosaurs, the real nice ones.
Oh, yeah.
And she bought me 1 or 2 of them, and then I had to have all of them. I was just totally freaking out. I just thought they were so awesome. So T-Rex, definitely. There's ones that have come along in more recent times that I find fascinating. Spinosaurus is one of them. I always love the carnivores because they're so interesting and horrific. But like even when you get into Jurassic Park, I gotta say I love the story because through most of it, you think the T-Rex is a villain, that he's hunting them. And he is. He's just doing what an animal does. But he's there at the very end to save them all, too, which is just great.
Right,
and
yeah.
I think that he's a wonderful character in the movie, too.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I have, now, so for personally, and I've shared this with on other interviews and episodes, my personal favorite has always been the Triceratops.
Yeah, that would have been one of my other ones. I love the trike, too.
Yeah, I always liked him because growing up, I was fascinated with rhinos as a kid. And then I found out about Triceratops, and I was like, oh, look, it's a triple rhino. It's got 3 horns.
Yeah. All the ceratopsians are fascinating creatures. And the fact that they, in particular, had such vast herds that they are the creatures that started the flowering of the plants, because there were so many dinosaurs eating the plants had to figure out a way to develop something that would allow them to reproduce quickly, and that was flowers. So the Triceratops in particular had vast herds, and they would have been one of the creatures that forced the plants to do this, basically.
All right, very cool. Well, Rick, thank you so much for being on the FSF podcast today. Like I said, we had just a thrill of a time meeting you at Monroe Comic Con.
It was a blast. I had a good time there.
Yeah, that's a great show. For those of you who have never been to the Monroe Comic Con in Monroe, Michigan, it's every September. We encourage you guys to check that out. You can find their website at monroecomiccon.com. But you'll see us there every year. We love going there. We love working the panel rooms and being able to meet great guys like Rick Hoberg. So, Rick, where can our listeners go to find out more about you, your work, and anything you've got coming up?
Well, I haven't been posting much. I should be posting on there, but on my website, which is Rick Hoberg Story Artist, and you can find me there. And there's things like what I'm working on at the moment, but also a collection of my Star Wars art, collections of the commission work that I do, collections of my comic book work. And like I said, I should be doing more of the alerts to upcoming cons, because I'll be in New Jersey in about I think it's the weekend after the election, or the weekend following that. I'd have to look that up again. And it's called the New Jersey Comic Fest. So, and I'm looking forward to it because I've never done a show in New Jersey before. So I always like finding a new group of fans I've never met before. That's fun for me. I have a great time going to Terrificon.
Nice.
Yeah, so I'll be doing that, and then later in the year, in the next year, I'm focusing on WonderCon in LA, because I'll be doing that in conjunction with Larry Houston. So it'll be 2 tables of all X-Men, basically.
Oh, that's very cool.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun. Larry is really great at these things. He's terrific.
Yeah, he's one of those guys that I haven't gotten on the show yet, but I'm hoping someday I'll be able to convince Larry to come on and talk with us. And you mentioned too your Star Wars art. I want to show this. This is from your page, and I'm a huge Star Wars fan, and to me, this was one of those things I was like, oh, would you look at that? You just have I loved that. That was really cool.
Yeah, and that's one of the images I used for the covers of my sketchbook.
Yeah, that's really
one of my sketchbooks has a color version of that, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that too. That was one of those things that whenever you're doing Star Wars and you're doing commissions, there are a lot of characters that have never met face to face that you can have fun with.
Oh, for sure, yeah, and that would be one of them right there.
Yeah, these are 2 beloved characters, you know.
Yeah, Darth Maul is one of my favorite bad guys. I mean, obviously, everyone loves Vader, and for good reason. He's one of the all-time villains. But yeah, I just wanted to share that. So, guys, if you're interested, go to Rick's website. That'll be listed down in the show notes down below. You guys will be able to check it out. He's got a ton of really cool work. You're still taking commissions, right?
I do. I'm slow at it though, so everybody be warned that I get distracted easily, and I run off and do other things. And my wife's always going, "Hey, this needs to be done around the house too," because I'm retired now. So I used to be faster when I was working, but they get done, and I always make sure they're really nice. So that be assured of.
All right. Well, so
yeah, so he's still on my computer right in front of me.
There you go. So yeah, guys. So he's still taking commissions. So if there's something that you want, a character that he's done over the years or anything, reach out to him through his website, and you'll be able to work that out for you. And we also want to take this moment to remind you that subscribing is the single most important thing you can do to help our show to continue to grow. So if you haven't by now, there will be a little button clicking on the screen right about now, and click that, and you guys will be able to click like and subscribe to our show, so you'll be able to get the opportunity to see our next guest that we have coming on. And make sure you go check out Rick's stuff and subscribe to anything he's got going, because we want to support people who are Rick's just really cool, and we just we're just thrilled to have him on the show. So this has been a big deal for me. I've been talking to some guys about this for a couple of days. I think everybody at my office is pretty much tired of me talking about my podcast at this point, but that's okay. But
Let me hit you up for a quickie. And when I get my first episode of my graphic novel, I'm going to need some press for that. So I may
absolutely, you're more than always welcome to come back. We'd love to have you on again.
If anybody wants a puppy, let me know.
Well, on that note, everybody, thanks for tuning into the FSF podcast, and goodbye.
See ya.
Copyright 2024 FSF Podcast. Reference to any specific product or entity mentioned on this podcast does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by FSF Podcast. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. If you have any questions about this disclaimer, please contact us via email at info@fsfpodcast.com.